we've now honored our past and reflected on where we've been. Now we're going to start talking about where we stand today. And to do this, we've put together a very special panel for you, and I'd like to invite our panelists to come up and join with us right now. We're going to be focused on arts education in the current educational environment. I want to invite up Mark Biedron, who is the president of the New Jersey State Board of Education, Dr. Richard Boza, who is the new executive director of the New Jersey the New Jersey Association of School Administrators, Dr. Larry Feinsod, the New Jersey School Boards Association Executive Director, Mary Reese, Dr. Mary Reese, who is with the Foundation of Educational Administration and a great friend of ours at the partnership, and of course Wendell Stanhauer, the president of the New Jersey Education Association. They will be part of a panel that will be led by the very adept hands of our good friend, the CEO of NJ Spotlight, Mr. John Mooney. John.
Good morning, everyone. All right. Don't worry, I won't make you repeat it. Thank you very much for including me on this. An issue, for those who don't know me, and NJ Spotlight, we're an online news outlet founded 5 years ago. Basically a bunch of former newspaper reporters who wanted to keep doing what we're doing, as we call ourselves, print refugees. And this was an issue. I covered education for the Star Ledger and the Bergen Record before it for 15, 20 years, and certainly in spending a lot of time in schools, I saw both the opportunities of arts education and what it did for a school. I'm also married to a elementary school principal who constantly talks about her arts educators. But I also, spending a lot of time in some tough schools, saw the gaps and schools that, for issues of priority, funding, resources, oftentimes space, arts education was not necessarily available to all, and saw the impact of that. So what I'd like to do as moderator is step aside and let these folks talk about where we are and some of the challenges we face now in arts education, as well as opportunities and some of the paths of improving the situation. Each one of them, and you have it in your biographies, but each one represents a different facet of our education system, and each brings a perspective of their members, of their constituencies, in some cases their bosses, in terms of this one here, and I'd like them to each tackle the subjects as we come across them from those perspectives, and hopefully it will build a broader theme and some messages that we can carry forward. I wanted to start. I mean, as Bob mentioned, we're talking about the present, and ask them one by one to sort of speak from their perspectives and their members. What is the state of arts education right now in New Jersey, and set a baseline. We talked a little bit about years past, and it was barely a passing grade back in the late 80s, and where are we now? And I'll start with the State Board of Education President Mark Biedron.
Well, thank you, John. Clearly, listening to the past two speakers, arts education has come a long way in the last 20 years in New Jersey. Do we have a long way to go? Yes. Clearly that what I've heard when I travel around the state is similar to what was spoken to before, that in many cases we're losing time in arts education because of increased testing, increased accountability, and that is not good. So I'm a big believer in arts education, and I believe that it brings to the table actually a lot of the new habits of mind and new ways of thinking and new skills that we need to address the problems of the 21st century. I would just speak to the gentleman who, the band leader who called up and said, how is my band concert going to contribute to the Common Core? Well, I actually have an answer for him. It actually is. Because the pedagogy behind the Common Core is creative thinking, problem solving, listening, communicating, working in groups, and believe it or not, that happens when you're in a band. I was in one. And that happens. So actually, his work does work. To Senator Kane's, Governor Kane's point, you know, the Common Core was designed to be integrated in that way. So, you know, we in education, this is really a tipping point right now in the conversation around education, around what we're looking at in terms of our core curriculum and where we might be going in the next 10 to 15 years. So I think we have work to do, and I don't think it should depend on your zip code, on how well, not only do you get educated, but on how much access you have to arts education.
Before I move to the next one, what instrument did you play in your band?
Clarinet, thank you.
Thank you. Rich, representing superintendents, among others, speak to, you know, the pressures or the challenges as well as opportunities on those who lead our districts.
Pressures, I think, is a good word. Strained, I think, would be another. We've gone through a period of time where schools have been put under the microscope from both the standpoint of what their outcomes are for children as we talk about career and college ready, when we talk about financial resources that have really been spread very thin and diminished. And we see these in what has come to be a prioritization, which I think unfortunately says language arts and math is what's tested and how we are measured, how we're valued, so therefore everything else is not part of the core. And so we have to start when we pare back from the outside, and unfortunately we start to see, I think, the arts fall into that area. We see it in many areas, but particularly the arts, because we actually have parents who are contributing out of their own pocket for their children to participate in athletic and co-curricular activities as these strains have come. So I think a sense of frustration by school leaders around the state, because I think to a person that they appreciate the importance of the arts and how they are integral to learning, that the research explains that you'll do a lot better in language arts and mathematics in particular when you're involved with the arts. And so I think that folks are feeling very, very strained in that regard. And I think going forward, the opportunities where we see, I think, lighthouse districts on how we might be able to integrate this and say, yes, these important parts of our curriculum are on par, have the same standing as those things that are tested. And I think that's where the opportunity presents itself. You know, and I offer this one example, which I think has always been very frustrating. My wife teaches television studio in middle school with children, which really means she teaches everything in addition to it's about cooperation, collaboration, preparation, working together. And one of the things I know in the many long years that I've been involved in schools, that when a child needs special help, they never come from math or language arts, they come from all the other areas of the curriculum, and there's a message that's sent right away that these areas are not quite as important. And I think that's the struggle and the challenge that we face.
Did you play in the band?
I had a brief, I always feel very inadequate in groups like this because I've never really...
You and me both, so I try.
Hasn't been my forte. I picked at the bass fiddle in 8th grade.
Okay, good enough. Larry, representing School Boards Association, yourself a former superintendent as well as county superintendent for the State Department of Education. A lot of pressure on your board members as they are also hearing from taxpayers as well, and some of the issues that arise there. Speak to the state of arts education from your perspective and your members' perspective.
Well, as I travel around the state and speak to board members from Cape May County up through Bergen County and everything in between, I basically hear the same message, and it's, Larry, we know you're a big proponent of the arts, but we have a 2% tax cap levy, and we have so much to do, and it's so difficult for us to focus on the arts when we have to focus on the other things that it seems are more important in terms of those aspects of mathematics and language arts that the PARCC tests hold us accountable to. Yet, I do feel, as I travel the state, that board members, for the most part, are sensitive to the fact that art education is so important, and many boards are doing Herculean jobs in terms of keeping the arts alive and well. I'm a little bit biased because I come from a family that has been very big art supporters since I was a little boy, and I have a daughter who is a professional actor, and so the arts has been a part of my life for many years. I've also reached out to all of the board members in New Jersey and have advocated the need to put the A in STEM. Every board member received a communique from me to please consider doing that. So there's just no question about it that the times right now are difficult when it comes to focusing on the arts, but it is an area of critical importance. I also think that college and career ready is so critical to the youth of our state, but so are the arts. So I think, in speaking to our state board president and to our commissioner, that we have to get into a dialogue that perhaps expands that. And I know that our state board president is very agreeable to that, and I also believe the commissioner is as well. So economically, the bottom line is it's very difficult for the boards in New Jersey to focus on so many areas with a 2% tax levy cap. So one of the things that we need to do is to take a look at that and see if there's a possibility for greater funding so that the arts can become a greater reality than they are now. And also we have to make sure that the arts never disappear. And I know they have in a few school districts, but we have to make sure that doesn't happen any further. And we're working very hard on that from our perspective. So stay tuned.
And we have, just to fill out the band a little bit, did you play in a band?
I did. I played the trumpet, and my 5th grade teacher, Miss Ann Sloan, from the Seth Boyden School in Maplewood, was the individual. We have someone was the individual who really turned me on, I think more than my mother and father, actually, to the importance of arts when I was a 5th grader at the Seth Boyden School, and then I decided to take the trumpet.
Great, great. Mary Reese, we're in your house. Thank you very much for hosting us. A former principal who I first met as a reporter when she was leading her school, and speak to the principals are on the front line. As well as the teachers, but speak from their perspective and supervisors from their perspective about, where arts education is now.
Certainly, John, and I'd like to welcome you all to our home. I'm very happy that the organizations that promoted this phenomenal event opted to have it here. Thank you. Bob mentioned the census that was developed and publicized years ago, and at one of the first opportunities, our former executive director was in the audience, and she came back and she said, "This is something that we really need to support." And from that day forward, I've been actively involved in the New Jersey Arts Education Partnership, because we do know we have quite a few challenges related to arts education in New Jersey, but we also know how successful we are. As Bob has also mentioned, we're one of the top states in terms of the programming that we offer to our students. And a lot of that has to do with the power of the leader in the school, whether it's the principal or whether it's the directors and supervisors of fine and performing arts. And I'm very happy that so many of them are here today, because we find that where we have very strong programs, we usually have very, very strong leaders. And part of my involvement with the Arts Partnership is to continue that leadership. We are very happy to offer professional development opportunities not only for our members but for those of the constituent groups at this table, and we will continue to do that. Certainly we know there are challenges, but we are hoping that with the type of leadership that is represented here today, that we will continue to move forward and support in any which way we can opportunities for all students in New Jersey to experience arts education. So once again, I thank you for being here today.
And then if you notice a theme, we're asking your arts experience. It doesn't have to be music.
Well, I went to a parochial school and we didn't have a band. And my mother was a gifted pianist, so she wanted me to learn how to play the piano. And naturally, as a rebellious young child, I decided to play the accordion. So I, for many years, took lessons.
This is quite a band we're building here. And on drums, Wendell Steinhauer. No. Wendell is, as you all know, president of the New Jersey Education Association, representing our teachers in virtually all of our districts. Literally those on the front line. You've had a lot of things on your plate lately in terms of where we stand on a host of issues, but and I'll admit, as a reporter covering policy in this state, arts education is not one that comes up a whole lot in some of the debates we've had lately, including and not necessarily the NJEA. But speak to where you think, from your members' perspective, arts education stands right now.
Well, first of all, I get to represent all the art educators out there, which is great, and I will tell you they are a passionate group. They aren't afraid to tell you what they think, and they're very dedicated to their profession. The perspective I have on the arts is, to sum it up and be pretty blunt, it's not on the test. And that's the biggest problem as you go through all of these things. All of my colleagues have laid out the right issues, but the problem is, in the state of New Jersey, if it's not on the PARCC test, that's where we're going to focus all our attention to. And what we need to do, some would say, well, let's get it on the PARCC test. But my answer is, let's get rid of the PARCC test. Because a lot of these things that we've heard about the time dedicated and the budget dedicated to it, this PARCC test has taken away. We spend all of our time getting kids ready, prepped for a test that concentrates on language arts and mathematics, which eventually crowds out time for everything else. Not just social studies, but the arts as well. And unfortunately, the arts are the first ones to get hit in time management. The second thing is the budget that we're being squeezed into. Those are things driven from this PARCC exam also. The PARCC exam, the PARCC curriculum, the testing resources, on and on and on. If we could take those resources and budget them to the whole child, which is how I grew up, testing was not the importance, and when I grew up, it was about getting a good rounded education. And that's what I think we've lost. And if we want to achieve that, it's not about getting on the test. It's about getting into the standards review. President Vedran said they're doing a standards review right now. Now is the time to get those standards in and create something that asks for more than just one 5-credit course in arts. And I know where you're going with the band thing. Okay. I played 3 sports. I played the radio. That's what I played.
Somebody had to. Well, let me follow up on that. I mean, how do we address, when you say get rid of the test? How do we address schools where, at least according to the test, but through various assessments, where where a third of the kids aren't reading at grade level or doing math at grade level? I mean, these are tools that are, yes, the accountability is a dirty word in a lot of sense, but these are tools that are used to ensure that kids are getting a decent education, which hopefully also includes the arts. How do you balance the two? Go ahead. I mean, we've tried, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we tried an arts test, it was a decade ago or so, and it didn't last very long. But how do you address the tensions there?
I'm not saying that testing should be eliminated completely. I think the park should be eliminated. There is a room for accountability, but we don't need to dedicate 6 weeks to 2 months figuring it out in a 10-month school year. So, and you referenced the accountability for visual arts. That was put upon the teachers to audition. I won't say audition, but to have kids perform in some way. What we have found, and if we ever go back to using research, which would be great, we have found that the arts have had children focus more on what they're doing. The example that Governor Kane gave on the student that it saved the kid's life from drugs, it's giving them a point of focus in life. And that's where we need to be. All the research shows it has helped to close the achievement gap. Students perform higher on their SAT scores and so on. This isn't something that we think may happen. This is what is happening, and we need to embrace it and start doing it. And the more that we bring this whole rounded student back into play, the better off we will be. The other thing that we have to do is stop replacing qualified art teachers in a budget cut with somebody that has done arts and craft at some point in their life and is going to substitute in for it. Qualified teachers, a well-rounded education, focusing through the arts on all subjects, not just two, will bring us back to where creativity and innovation and the great inventors of our time will flourish.
Mark, speak to this. You're dealing with this right now, and how do you address these tensions? I'm not standing before the World Language Summit, which is also, they would be saying much the same as their classes are also getting what they feel pushed out. But how do you address these tensions between making sure all kids get a decent education and also serving them a whole education?
Well, first of all, I just want everybody to know before we get going further that Wendell and I are very, very good friends. We meet on a monthly basis. We agree on a lot, and we also sometimes agree to disagree. So one thing that I will say that I do not agree with is that if it's not on the PARCC test, it's not important. That is not what we believe at the State Board of Education. That is not what we believe. So we really believe in a lot of the things that Wendell said after that. So what are we going to do about this, right? You hear there's not enough time in the day. You hear that there's too much testing. So, has the pendulum swung too far to the right for accountability? That's a very good conversation. Are we testing our children too much? That's a very good conversation. And we are going to have that conversation at the state board level. We need to look at what is an ideal education. Is it the model we have where we've come to right now? We're in a different world now than we were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Totally different. And there are new skills and habits of mind that we need to empower our children with to be successful in this ever-changing world. And how do we do that? And arts education speaks to those new habits of mind and new skills. So, when we look at the day, when we look at what we're teaching the children, the core curriculum, the things we're teaching, the idea that we have to impart all this information and content like we did back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, I think we have to relook at that. Because guess what? My 15-year-old daughter can get all the information and content she needs by pressing a button. I just listened to a Harvard professor who teaches at the Harvard Medical School, and they're re-looking at everything that they teach and how they teach it. And he said to his students, my job is to teach you the things that you can't Google, right? And so those things that you can't Google, and maybe you can't assess them, right? I mean, maybe we don't need to test art. And so we're really looking at these things. Our board, just so you know, is having a retreat on October 21st. And the things that we're going to look at at that retreat, to Larry's point, is that, is college and career ready our mission? Is that it? Is there more to what we're supposed to be giving children than just be college and career ready? I would say yes. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to come out with a new mission statement. We're going to look at a new vision statement. We're going to look at things that we value, and we're going to put together a whole new strategic plan for the next 10 to 15 years, hopefully, that sets a pathway to, you know, what an ideal education should look like. And it's going to include arts education in a big way, because those things are the things that we want, these new kind of, you know, creative thinking, problem-solving skills, so that when a child steps into a job that doesn't exist today, they can be successful. Content is not going to get you that. So is content important? Absolutely. There are certain things we need to do, but do we need to memorize things that you can press a button to get anymore? I would argue that we don't. And that opening up curriculum, opening up the day will give us more time to look at some of these other subjects, other skills, other things to do that have gotten squeezed out. And so that's where we're headed at the state level, at least my board is.
Rich, I often hear, and I've talked to Mark a lot, but I hear this from the commissioner as well, is we want a whole child, and it's not just about the park. It's about, you know, teaching them, you know, a multitude of skills to the standards and the like. And then I go to a superintendent or a principal, and Mary, you can speak to this, who go, yeah, but we're being judged by these scores, and in some cases there's some funding that could hinge on it. At least there's a feeling about that. Where is the disconnect, or is there a disconnect between the message that someone like Mark and others are trying to put out, and then how superintendents feel in running their districts?
I think there is a disconnect when you get down to the people who have boots on the ground, because they're dealing with all of those problems that we're talking about. And as I mentioned, even asking parents to put their hand into their pocket to support things. Certainly, I think we are pleased to hear the direction of the state board. I know when I do some strategic planning exercises, I like to talk about getting in a time machine, and you come out in 10 or 15 years or 20 years and you look around. What do you think it might look like? And how do we then get there from where we are now in terms of that gap analysis? And so I think a couple of things that will help us to get there. And I just want to make a side observation. You know, there are many, many communities where parents, I think, are much more appreciative, informed, and expect experience for their children in the arts, and they make sure that it happens. In other places, that may not be quite the same way. But I think there are going to be advances that are going to do a couple of things. That they're going to diminish testing the way we know it today. They're going to increase personalization of learning for kids, and that we're going to be looking at schooling in the not too distant future that's very different from what we have seen in the past. So whenever I speak with Mark or speaking with legislators a week ago, we talk about let's not preserve the past, let's look to the future and see how we might change things. And I think that's part of what Mark's message is. And I think technology is going to be a key factor in doing that. If we think about how technology has even affected the arts, how different they are today based on technology, I think that's our future. And what we will know, for example, is we'll have much better measurements of children's progress in all areas based on technology that supports their learning, which will say we really don't need to test children at the end of the year because we've got such a great record going forward where we can demonstrate that children are performing. And the state board has standards, not just in language arts and math, but throughout the curricular areas. So I think that's the great hope for us, and I think we need to be similar to football season. The quarterback doesn't throw the ball to where the person is now. They throw to where they think they're going to be at the end of the play. And I think that's how we have to look at this. What does the future for our children hold in education? How do the arts integrate and support that? What can we do now to move forward? We as an organization are working on those things. We have just shared a plan called Vision 2020, which is what we think is essential for public education and beyond. And as I indicated, it's not going to be a static document. It's going to be one that changes with advancements, and we need to look forward. We need to work collaboratively to get there, and we need to be able to make those changes happen that will give these experiences for all kids throughout not only our state but our nation.
Mary, let me ask, I mean, some of the stats that were put up, you know, 97% of kids have arts every day. That means 3%, or roughly, somebody help me with the math, 30,000? Don't. And there was another survey where some teachers talked about not having any art, or some students, well, I guess not having any art classes at all meet for 3 months at a time. How does that happen? I mean, what is the decision process? Is that a principal acting on their own because they're panicked about doing enough reading prep? Is it a school board that's pulled it back? You know, it's sort of walk me through how that can happen in a state that requires this for every kid on a regular basis, and there's 30,000, which is the size of my hometown, that doesn't have art.
Well, I think a lot has to do with the culture that's present among our leaders. Years ago, we had the Secretary of Education come to New Jersey, and I distinctly remembering her say, "What gets assessed gets taught." And last week, I was in Chicago at a United States Department of Education conference, and an Assistant Secretary of State was there who said the exact same thing. And it was like deja vu. We haven't gotten away from that message. And I think that when we hear from national leaders that what gets assessed gets taught, it may not necessarily be the primary focus of school district officials, but it's certainly a subtle focus. And I think that depending upon the strength of the leader, as I said before, is whether we do have the arts or not. As a principal, I felt it was integral to the development of the students in my school to have access on a daily basis to the arts. So, but that was my perspective. And I also had a superintendent and a school board that supported that as well. But when one lives in an environment where other priorities may be what the leaders are promoting, it's incumbent upon us, those who are principals and supervisors, that we advocate for the whole child's development. And I think if you listen to Ken Robinson and some of the other authors and presenters on this topic, by the time we get to third grade, we're beating the creativity out of children. And the bottom line is we today should be preparing citizens of the world, global citizens. And we can't do that if they are only proficient in language arts, literacy, and math, which are highly important. They need to have other skills that come with the instruction that occurs through arts education. And all those, what we call 21st century skills, although we're 21st century now, creativity, teamwork, critical thinking, problem solving, those types of skills come through instruction in the arts. So it's really nearsighted of our national leaders to be moving away from that direction when we should be preparing our students today to face the challenges that are more global. And I truly believe this is through a very solid, expansive arts curriculum that covers all 4 arts areas, not just the music and the arts that we've been talking about today.
I wanted to ask Larry, follow up on that. You, in your role working for the state, you were often responsible for at least overseeing the famous CUSAC process, which was a monitoring process, which is a monitoring process for schools, and arts education is one of it, as is every other standard. But how, from the state's point of view, does a school get away with not providing arts classes or providing no music classes versus visual arts? I mean, these are often self-reported, I assume, to the state, but is it a capacity issue in the state enforcing its own standards? Can you speak a little bit from that perspective?
Well, when I wore the hat of Executive County SUP and we did a CUSAC evaluation, the district was held accountable through the CUSAC evaluation if they didn't meet the arts requirement. So they obviously lost the requisite amount of points.
But is it them reporting that they didn't meet the arts requirement, or were you going in there to check whether classes were being taught? I mean, how is that determined?
Well, both. I mean, on certain forms that districts would receive, there's a reporting factor, as well as what occurs when a state team comes in and does the monitoring. Most of the districts we found were honest and upfront, and they indicated that we just don't have the money, or we don't have this, or we don't have that, and we're really willing to take points off from the CUSAC evaluation, but this is why we can't do it. And they were held accountable.
Speak to me. Speak a little bit about STEAM. You said you brought it up, and it's happening more and more, and there's a lot of conversation. But what does it mean on the ground?
Well, on the ground, what we're doing is we're advising all of the boards in New Jersey to give serious consideration to adding the arts to STEM so that it's science and technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And what we're saying is, in order for the other subject areas to be a critical part of a child's life, the child needs arts education. And we use some examples relating to engineering and architecture and mathematics where creativity is necessary. As a matter of fact, there's lots of research out there that indicates some of the best mathematicians, some of the best engineers go back to the creative arts as they're figuring out calculations and coming and making conclusions. So when I reached out to all of New Jersey's school board members, and that also means most of the charter school members as well, we have most of the charter school trustees or board members who also voluntarily belong to New Jersey school boards. So what we're trying to do is focus on the importance of STEM, and we're doing more in that area than any other school boards association in the nation. We actually have 2 full-time staff members who are dedicated to sustainability and green technology as well as to STEM issues. But what we're trying to focus on is adding the arts. And so we've told school boards, you've got to add the arts. If you're truly going to get into STEM education, it's not real without the arts.
And how do superintendents react to that? Rich?
Well, I think they are. I think when we talk about the experience of students, I think a couple things come in here. One is leadership is critically important. I mean, if you're an advocate and you're vocal and you're energetic about this, you're going to find a way to do this, whether you're a principal, a supervisor, or a school superintendent. The other thing is, I think there's just that generates various levels of commitment. But the superintendents and school leaders that I talk to are, I think, firmly behind this, but dealing with that issue of how do we balance all of the priorities when the report, we talk about the disconnect, when the report card places this up front, not necessarily the others. And so I think the part of education here is, we've all had the experience, just go to any student performance. You can't find a place in a parking lot. You know, whatever it may be, whether it's an art exhibit, it's a play, it's a musical production, you can't find a place to get there. And that's the kind of spirit, I think, that we need to generate and make sure that we are talking with our staff members as to how do we integrate that. You know, I think of 3 key issues that probably shaped how I look at this and have conversation. Going all the way back to 1980 when I was first interviewed to be a school principal, I was asked about what were the basics, and arts was part of it, and in that community they appreciated it. Another was when I was superintendent of the Marie Katzenbach School for the Deaf, and I saw how art therapy impacted the lives of deaf and blind students. Absolutely just an earth-shattering thing for me to witness, to see kids and young adults do things I never imagined that they could do. And then the third was to keep that commitment on, and in another suburban high school district began a new program where every freshman and sophomore had not only a team of the core subjects, but they were required as part of that team to have arts education. And I wanted to make it mandatory right away, and my staff said, don't do that. Let's just put it in on a voluntary basis. Within 2 years, everybody wanted it because the experience enriched everything they did in the subject areas, and they had products to produce, and they personalized their learning. So I think that kind of initiative, finding the ways to bridge those gaps, and I see more and more districts are doing this with project-based learning. I think with support from the state board, with support from school boards and the other representatives here, that will make progress. But talking about it and dealing with the resources are going to continue to be, you know, where we have that disconnect. We need resources to get these things done, and that would be a whole nother forum to talk about school funding and that.
Mark, is there any notion of, right now it's 1 year as a graduation requirement, 1 year of arts, if I'm right, I think I am. Any notion of increasing that? Is there a mandate piece to this that the state should play, or, you know, that also can get troublesome when these things get mandated? Is that part of the discussion?
We aren't having that discussion about, you know, increasing that requirement or decreasing it or anything like that. I mean, now that I've been here, that might bubble up, but at this point we're not.
Okay. Others think that makes a difference. I mean, is this a place for state mandates to increase around the arts? Is that effective, or there's a lot of resentment when that happens too, and especially around the funding. Others want to weigh in on that piece?
I'll weigh in on that. I think the state board talking about what's important in terms of a student's experience does matter, and then we'll get to the level of commitment in terms of, are people just going through the motions to provide what's required, or are they really committed to providing a genuine and productive experience? But I would say there are many districts now, we talk about high school graduations, get well beyond the amount that is required by the state board, and I don't think it would be inappropriate for the state board to make a strong position on this.
Larry?
Yeah, I agree that the state board certainly has an influence on the thinking within the field. I would be opposed, however, to another mandate. Encouragement and focus and emphasis, yes. Another mandate, no. I think we have too many mandates that are either unfunded or underfunded. And that's helping to put this enormous strain on local districts, and that's contributing to the conundrum that we have in certain districts in New Jersey regarding how much emphasis is permitted to focus on the arts. I think we do have to talk about school funding. I don't mean here and now, but I think we all know it's difficult to run a school district on 2% and do everything that we need to do for children. Most importantly, as we're talking today, the beauty and wonder of the arts and everything else. So in this conversation today, at least bringing up the concept of school funding is critically important.
One of the questions that, on the issue of funding is the issue of fees, and it certainly has been a big issue in extracurricular activities and sports, but I've heard it also come up more and more in terms of the arts. But that also raises the issues of equity and access. It certainly puts, even for schools that are going to help families who can less afford it, there's still some reluctance on that. Talk a little bit about, Mary, it's often individual schools that have to do this to sustain a program. Is that happening a lot? Is that worrisome? Is that just a fact of life these days?
I think the equity issue is tremendous, and I wouldn't want us to get into the habit of charging parents for students to participate in the arts. I think it's wrong-sided.
Does it happen a lot? I mean,
no.
Okay.
Thank goodness. It's happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we had more economic difficulties within the schools, but I think even some of the districts that went that route have reneged on it now. I don't believe that it's the way to go in terms of providing for students, because once again you're going to have the haves and have-nots, and you don't want to get into the discussion of, well, who's on free and reduced lunch, who doesn't need to pay, etc. It causes students to stand out, and I don't think that's appropriate. I also think that when you're talking about mandates, we should probably look at what we currently have and make sure that's implemented. As I said before, we have 4 arts areas: theater, dance, visual performing arts, and music. And when you look at the census, you'll see that the bulk of the students who are receiving the arts are in music and art. And I think it's really important that if we're going to look to what we're offering our students, we should be giving them a well-rounded set of choices so that they can experience arts across the board. So I would prefer that rather than adding more mandates in terms of amount of time, that we look at what we're currently doing right now and advocate for those 4 arts areas to be included for all students in our state.
Jumping back to that topic, how does that happen when the requirements are clear? Is a principal saying, you know, the state's not going to call us on it. We've got to do what we got to do, and we'll face the consequences if they do. I mean, what is the thinking of a principal or an administrator on that?
Well, it goes back to what was discussed by Larry and Rich about budget, and it's a matter of what the budget will bear. And in many cases, if there aren't strong advocates for the 4 arts areas, they don't occur. And that's the bottom line.
There's no real fear the state's not going to do anything about it or call them out
as Larry pointed out, when we're not doing such rigorous monitoring anymore, so it's probably easy to either check off the boxes or not, and just assume that nobody's going to come and complain about it. Okay. Which is not the way we should be operating. We should be, looking to what's right. We should be implementing all the core curriculum content standards as well as the Common Core state standards, and they clearly point out that there are 4 areas of arts in those.
We're going to take some questions, but I wanted to follow up. One thing that Wendell said early on was about teachers oftentimes being replaced by subs who, as I think your words, arts and crafts. But talk about the pipeline, and are there arts teachers out there? Is it available? Are the folks available to fill some of these needs? And what are the pressures, and how does it happen where an arts teacher is replaced by a long-term sub who doesn't have that background? But talk about the bodies in the classroom that are charged with this task.
I don't think it's a lack of art educators. I think it's a lack of funding that's creating it. And what's been happened is a full arts program has been squeezed down. I'm not saying the long-term subs in there. I'm saying a regular teacher that may teach half a day of math or of social studies or something, and then does a period of art in some form. It's about squeezing the budget. I don't think it's a lack of educators. That's where I was.
There is a strong pipeline in terms of your understanding. I mean, it's not like math and science and special ed, which have often been.
Those are physics teachers, math teachers, and special ed teachers are usually the typical shortage areas. I have not heard of any shortages in art education.
And Mary, speak to that then. Again, is that a budget issue that's forcing them into that situation? Sometimes. Is it a space issue where they have to share a teacher? What is prompting that kind of situation?
Well, I think the biggest issue is space. And unfortunately, so many teachers of the arts might not even have their own classroom space, particularly at the elementary level. I mean, I know you hear about the art on a cart, but it's not so much as it's a priority. It's that there are buildings that are overcrowded in our state, and it's really a matter of scheduling to be sure that the children receive these services. And but it's not because we have a lack of teachers. It's that we look at our individual facility needs, and very often we wind up not being able to provide the kind of climate that is appropriate for arts instructors, most unfortunately.
Others want to speak to that issue in terms of the manpower available, the space available? I mean, we're certainly at a situation where we're not doing a whole lot more construction right now. We've run out of money on that. Wendell, you want to?
A lot of these rooms are specialty rooms. You have a band room that has a certain configuration and acoustics. You have an art room. They definitely need sinks and storage areas and running water and so on like that. Not many classrooms are usually equipped in that way. So you're talking about a dedicated program to make sure that those type of facilities exist from the start. And yes, there isn't a lot of new construction, but that has to be included in the new construction. If it's not in there, nobody's going to run extra plumbing into a room when it's all finished and done with. So you have to plan ahead for these things, and that's in new construction and in old current structures. A lot of this, and we're not seeing overcrowding now. But a lot of times, these are the art room did become the other room that had to have math or something taught in it.
We're taking questions. I think if you have a question, there's a mic set up. Can you join us up here? I see a couple hands went up. There we go.
Yeah, my name is Ed Guy, and I'm a drama teacher. I just wanted to support Wendell's point. In my experience while very often the facilities are just not there for arts teachers, particularly drama teachers, it's not about the facilities, though. And it's because as a drama teacher, I don't have any facilities. We also have dance in our school, and the dance teacher gets to do a touring, and I have a classroom together. But
is this an elementary school or what level? High school?
High school.
Okay.
But a teacher who was certified in English, and it's happened on numerous occasions, wound up teaching drama as well. Not certified in drama, but somehow the thought is that it's okay. It's only drama. Meanwhile, I've spent my life dedicated to drama, and it's just tossed off with another teacher who has marginal experience in that, not certified, and is allowed to teach it because it's convenient for them to fill out the schedule, and they can say that, oh, drama is offered in that building, but it's not certified teachers. So it definitely does happen, and I know of more than one incident of this happening. So it's not because of the facility, there are other factors in this, one of which is that it's convenient.
And people look the other way? I mean,
yeah, it's just, nobody is going to look at this anyway because Trenton is too busy. They don't have the money to be concerned about this. So it just doesn't happen. So they feel like there are certain things that districts feel that they can do because Trenton can't be bothered looking at those things.
Mark, speak to that. I mean, Trenton too busy to...
Well, Trenton's a very big place, and there's a lot of organizations that you may be talking to. Of course, there's the state board. Then, of course, there's the governor's office, and then, of course, there's the Department of Education and many other groups that are all looking at this. Obviously, from my standpoint at the state board, that would not, fall. I think it's really, you might want to ask the commissioner that when he gets here this afternoon. That's a really good question for the department. But I just wanted to talk to the facility for 1 second. And as we design new schools, and I'm not just talking about arts classes or drama classes or acting classes, I'm talking about classrooms in general. And as we start seeing how tight we are for money, how high energy costs are going, and how much it costs to build a really good facility, one of the things we have to look at is how do you, and I don't have the answer to that, and I think we're thinking about it, how do you construct classrooms that are resilient and can be used, by multiple activities that don't take the whole day? So, the idea of having a classroom that only gets used, 2 hours a day is probably not going to be what the future is. What we need to figure out is how do you construct a classroom that's very usable by the particular course, that has everything you need, but then can also be used by somebody else right after you. So this is kind of what I think we have to look at as we look at the way we start constructing schools for the future.
I think you had a question in the back? Oh, okay. She took the mic back there.
Hi, I'm Tara Cunningham with the J. Linda Brennan Foundation, and I'd be very interested in the panel's views on the calculation of grade point averages. There are some phenomenal students that will not go into the arts because on a 5.0 grade point average, orchestra, theater, music, you can only get a 4.0 in arts. It's a secondary structure, and it inhibits the importance of an arts education. Is there any movement towards equating those subjects with a 5.0 scale?
Who wants to take that on? I mean, I think there was some action on that a few years back, I think, but
I think that depends on the community you're in. I know that I was in a community where they were, this goes back about a decade, they were moving away from grade point averages and reporting out who's a valedictorian. If I could wave the magic wand, I'd get rid of grade point averages and I'd be talking about competencies. But that's hard for parents to accept, that there's not an A or a B or a C, and when we get into great arguments about what's a minus, what's a plus, as opposed to what's the learning that we're requiring and how do we report on the progress on that. So, those battles play out. Periodically you'll pick up the newspaper and you'll see they're talking about grading, or they're talking about doing something differently. And
I think if we can make that focus about what is it that we want children to learn and how do we know that they're arriving there, then we'll get away from what we've seen. And I think colleges are beginning to move a little bit away from that, even looking differently at SATs and ACTs, for example. So I think there's some hope. I think, as I mentioned earlier, as we get more to personalization of learning and as technology allows us to do things that we haven't been able to do before, that's part of looking down the road that I mentioned, and let's try to work toward getting there.
I think there was a bill, Bob, can you speak to, there was a bill last year, a couple years ago, that would equate?
Current session, House Bill 3, or Assembly Bill 311.
311, and the sponsor of that is, do you know?
John Bramnick and Patrick Diamond and
Bipartisan, no less, okay.
Tom Kane and Teresa Reeves.
And has it gone anywhere?
It's passed the Assembly Education Committee, ready to go to the Assembly. It was introduced into the Senate Education Committee, but has not moved for action.
Do good work. You can write that up, and NJ Spotlight will run it. That was good. He knows his stuff. Knows his stuff. I'd love to hear from you guys, even like the first questioner, of your view of the state of the arts education. Are there others who want to weigh? Yep. Oh, great.
Good morning. My name is Wendy Glisco. I'm with the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and thank you all for your comments so far. I was moved by the governor sort of saying, don't sit here quiet, be militaristic if you need to be. But so I'd like to ask this group, where do you've addressed it somewhat, but to push this even further, where are our levers to get this into the hearts and minds of people, parents? Any thoughts on that, to move so that in 10 years we are in a different place?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. You all are advocates, one way or the other. So what are the levers you push, and what are the levers those in the audience can push?
Well, I think you push at your local community. It's always the most important. You push people such as Larry and I, if we're school board members or if we're school superintendents or principals, and say, hey, this is what we expect for our children. How can you help us to get there? So that's one place. I think the other lever to push is, one that's really hard to push, and that's that issue of finances. Right now, I go around the state talking to school superintendents saying, watch out, things could get worse. They're not so great now. You haven't been funded over 8 years at the level that the School Funding Reform Act said you should be, and so you're suffering from that. Now you've got the 2% tax levy cap, which is, depending on the community you're in, may or may not be a lot of money. If you're in a wealthy suburban community, you've got a large 2% compared to a community that has a lot of state aid and very little taxes. And so that push, and we push that, but the response we get from the legislators is precisely, we've got the Transportation Trust Fund, we've got the pension issues, we've got all of these issues, and and everybody's pushing their own agenda. But I think that's the place that, if it's important, if we value it, then we have to say, what do we expect at our local community and our local school, from our local school board and superintendent, and what do we expect the state to do to help us to get the resources that we need to accomplish the goals that we share.
I think if you want to push our levers where you can, we love to hear people come to public testimony, and I know that up until about 6 months ago, the only time you could do that at the state board level was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday. But we have now established nighttime public testimonies, totally open to the open topic. We have them in regional areas, and believe me, we listen to that. And if you've just witnessed any of the subject matter that we've been talking about over the last 8 or 9 months, there has been incredible amount of public testimony in that. And you come to an open public session, you come before us, and we'll listen. I'm at every one of those, and several of my board members are. So that's really good for us to hear. And then that stuff gets brought before our board, and we start talking about that. And you can write us a letter. You can call me personally. I mean, we want to hear. This is important stuff, and we want to listen. We may not always agree with your point of view, but we definitely want to listen.
And to give credit where credit is due, tremendously accessible state board president. I called him last night, so he's sick of me. But I've heard it over and over where if you're having a meeting, even very local meeting of a few folks, if Mark can do it, he'll be there. So
I've gone on various topics to people's homes, everything from there to going down to Wendell's conference and listening to everybody. I mean, you know, we got to hear all points of view. That's the way we get informed decisions. So, you know, you can get a hold of me through the state board any way you want. We'll be happy to have conversations about what you think is important.
I also would like to weigh in on what was said. There are public meetings at night in all of New Jersey's school districts at the board level. And our board members want to hear from local community members. They want to hear what is on your mind. And there's always a public portion to every board meeting. And that's the time to express what you feel. So the support for the arts need to be made at that time, in addition to contacting school board members, sending them emails, telephone calls, letters, and so on and so forth. But let your feelings be known. Moreover, it's important, in addition to Mark and the state board and the commissioner, it's very important that our legislators hear from you. So often, a legislator will say to me, well, I really didn't hear much from anyone. The bottom line is the staff of every state senator and state assembly person we have calculates, adds up how many emails, how many phone calls, how many snail mails were received on topics and whatnot. So in addition to making your feelings known to local school district officials, board members, superintendents, and so on, and in addition to what we just talked about at the state level with the DOE and the state board, contact your elected officials as well to push the arts agenda.
Mary?
Yes, I want to echo what they've just said. We have to be advocates for ourselves. Those of us who are involved with the arts and those of us who support the arts need to have those conversations in a general way. We can't wait for a crisis to occur and then all of a sudden say, oh, hi, I'm one of your constituents. So I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to not only approach the State Board of Education, our local boards of education, but knock on the door of our legislators and say, I just would like to introduce myself. This is what I do. Invite your legislators to various performances if you're actively engaged. But then when there are special issues that need to be addressed, such as the legislation which Bob referenced, then you'll have that relationship with the person. It's sometimes a little bit intimidating to do this, but I found that our legislators are just like us. They're just regular old people who have jobs of their own, and they really like to be well informed. And also, if you don't have the opportunity to work with the legislators, work with their aides, because oftentimes they're more powerful than some of the legislators because they help shape the policy and the opinions of those legislators. So, and the other thing too is, we have at FEA a long-time relationship with the Dodge Foundation, and we've been running the past several years a summer institute calling Using Arts-Infused Instruction to Enhance the Common Core. And we've had teams from all over the state come to these events, and many of our participants are in the audience. And the richness that comes from those projects that are developed and implemented within school districts should be celebrated as well. We talk about how to incorporate STEAM within a school district. Well, Dr. Joanne Mullane is here today from HOPACCON, and HOPACCON, as a result of this process, has become a STEAM district. And what better way to promote positive support of the arts than to have a newspaper or social media address that, and I know that she does that in an exemplary way. So we really need to be advocates however we want, and we have to get out of our comfort zone in order to do that.
Wendell, and speak, Wendell, because a lot of, you have some members here too, how the union can be an advocate for them, and not necessarily arts education, but, somebody raised the point that, it's not just drama teachers teaching drama anymore, and who do they have to turn to, if not their union, oftentimes? But speak to that.
First of all, the two levers you want to hit, legislators legislate, the Department of Ed regulates. Those are the two key parts. The legislators will provide the skeleton of what you want, and the Department of Ed will put the meat on the bones with the regulations. So those are the two main folks. As far as John asked, how do we advocate? That's one of our full-time jobs in NJEA. We contact our members and to organize under certain bills. We do those door knocks, we do those emails and calls and all that through organizing. The key in all of this is if you're going to get something passed, you go to the people that are most interested. I saw a state senator in here this morning. It's not too hard to figure out who I would call first if I was looking to find someone to sponsor a bill. And then he may know someone that's in a bipartisan relationship that has that same love of the arts. So that's where you asked about levers, it's getting it done. Doing it locally is great if you have time to go to 566 districts in the state of New Jersey. That'll take a long time. By getting legislation passed and regulations, that, and I know we don't like the word mandate, but that implements it into all 566 districts. So if you want it to be prioritized, and I think that's where we all are. I've listened for the last hour up here, this entire panel. I haven't heard a lot of disagreement. I've heard a lot of agreement, maybe except for my friend Mark on the park test. All right, well, and that's why we're at opposite ends of this. But I think we're all in agreement here. The problem is I'm not a legislator and I don't work in the Department of Ed, and neither do any of us here. So that is the key levers that you want to hit if you're looking for a pathway of action other than just discussion.
I'm Bill May. I'm retired from the Newark Public Schools, and I have two questions, but I want to begin with the end, and that is, I am a musician. I play the most important instrument in any ensemble. I'm a double bass player. Dale may not like that. But Mark, just a quick thought. I was very impressed with your comments concerning the rationale for the band director. Is there any way that the State Board of Ed can work to help the rest of the superintendents, principals, and teachers throughout the state of New Jersey to understand that, so that maybe there's some of that superfluous paperwork can be omitted? The second part of my, or second question is, and this is one that's bothered me all of my life, particularly as a professional when I was an educator, and still does. How do we cut money from education when our children are our most important commodity?
There you go.
I'll answer your first question with a simple answer. Yes, we can do that, and part of our charge when we go to our retreat is to be so intentional about that kind of pedagogy in all subjects, the ability to do that in all subjects, teach to those skills. We have to do that, and the department can do that, and the Board of Ed can do that, and we will do that. And to your second piece, believe me, I'm with you. You're preaching to the choir. You know, I just, you know, to everyone sitting in this room, everyone on this panel, what I say every time I meet people that are in the educational space, you are doing the most important work on the planet. You are designing the future through K-12 education. K-12 is going to be in charge in 10 or 15 years while we're all sitting back. They're going to be making all the decisions that the people that are in charge now are making. And it's your work that's going to influence that. So I don't know the answer to that. If I had a magic wand, and I don't want to get political here, I mean, you know, gosh, I'd make education the #1 thing we're doing in this country, in this state, and spend, you know, put all our resources to that, because that's going to create jobs and that's going to create a better future. So I hear you.
I wanted to, we'll end on that note. I mean, certainly I hope we're back here in 5 or 10 years for the next summit. And it is going to be a challenging 5 or 10 years financially, certainly. And there's a lot of hurdles for this state to pass on a number of fronts in terms of its education. But certainly this is one, as Wendell said, this is one where, at least in this room, there's pretty widespread agreement, and I think throughout our society, and it's how we get there. So I want to thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, John. I don't know about you, but I found that extraordinarily informative. I think one of the big takeaways from all of this is that just as they have been for the past 25 years, these are partners, these associations that are here today. So I'd like to, again, extend my thanks to Mark Biedron, Dr. Boza, Dr. Feinsod, Dr. Mary Reese, and Wendell Steinhauer for joining us today and sharing their expertise. Now it's incumbent upon us to work with them to achieve the goals that we have for arts education in the state. So thank you very much, everyone.